is going to be critical. We'll look at the key questions we think farm businesses need to be asking themselves. We'll hear from farmers about what they're doing to prepare for the future and look at how AHDB is gearing up with new tools and resources to help. You can ask questions. You can contact the programme direct if you're watching us live. Direct message us at the AHDB or hashtag AskAHDB. So what do we need to do next? That's the question. To help answer that question and others, I'm joined by a panel of experts. But before I introduce them, let's hear what you had to say on the subject.
They're always going to want food. So, as talking from a farmer's point of view, as long as we can be efficient, and through AHDB and the benchmarking, it does make you look at your costs and hopefully make you a little bit more efficient. As long as we can be efficient, I think we will survive in the world market.
What I expect to see going forward, unfortunately, is a very tough time in the short term for agriculture. Farmers are going to have to learn very quickly that the subsidies are limited, and that I think there'll be, if there are any subsidies, they will be very strongly linked to environmental stewardship of one form or another. And I think a lot of smaller farmers are going to lose out, and a lot of inefficient farmers are going to lose out. I think the AHDB have a real important role with knowledge exchange, trying to improve the technical capabilities of farmers, getting them to understand their businesses better. I think the Farm Bench project could be absolutely vital because it will be showing off whole businesses rather than just one crop or one sector of somebody's business. So I think that is a vital part to be pushed forward. But it's the knowledge exchange, trying to give farmers the tools to look to improve their businesses so they can cope without the subsidies and be prepared for the modern marketplace.
Jack Watts, AHDB lead analyst, specialises in grain markets and farm business risk management. He was brought up on a first-generation farm, studied agriculture at the University of Nottingham, and after graduating worked in New Zealand for a progressive dairy business. Philip Dolbear, AHDB's Knowledge Exchange Manager. Philip began his career in consultancy with ADAS before moving to HSBC, spending 20 years in banking. In 2013, Philip joined AHDB Cereals and Oilseeds with a special interest in farm business management and benchmarking. Peter Hardwick, AHDB Head of Exports. Peter joined the Meat and Livestock Commission in 1994, where for 15 years was based in Brussels, running the EU office as well as managing the meat export trade development work from 1999. Peter heads up the AHDB team that manages international trade development and marketing, the meat, dairy and crops sectors. I'm John Bates. Welcome to Brexit360. Jack Watts, AHDB lead analyst.
I think there's a fair degree of optimism from what we've heard there in those sort of introductory comments. Philip, is that what you hear when you're out on farm?
Yes, in the cereal sector in which I'm working, those videos certainly capture the mood of what I'm hearing on farm. There's always going to be the challenges of weather, but there's increasing pressures of active choice available for crop protection, resistance, and of course market volatility continues. And farmers are really increasingly looking at their businesses. They realise they've got a window of opportunity this season at the moment with some currency devaluation, improving their commodity prices. But that won't last forever, and therefore they're looking closely at their business to see where they can make longer term improvements for margin and profitability.
Jack, they tell me that you've got a Brexit bucket list. So what's in your bucket?
Yes, John. Well, this was something we put together ahead of the cereals event, and it's a little bit light-hearted, just trying to capture the attention of everyone. But really, there's a real serious note to it. And the bucket list we're referring to is in the latest version of Grain Outlook. And this morning, I put a grab of that up on LinkedIn this morning, my personal account, and it should be going up on the Twitter feed as we speak now. But really, emanates from a bit of concern that we might have about how the industry is approaching Brexit. Because of all the uncertainty that we've got coming up, it's a classic thing. It's an excuse to do nothing. It's an excuse to really focus on the day job. Really, there's plenty of things to be doing on the farm, but let's crack on with that. And the uncertainty, yeah, there's a lot there, but it doesn't necessarily prevent us from doing anything. And that really what we put together is a really ambitious checklist that farmers can use from today in their own farm office, and really going through and sort of understanding where they are today. And just some key points out of the list, if I may. I mean, the first one, Philip, you'll be very familiar with, is a very traditional message about getting hold of production costs, a real understanding of what production costs mean. And I've had the privilege of going out and seeing quite a number of farm businesses across a lot of sectors over the last 12 months or so. And I've noticed that the good businesses know their production costs, but really that's the fantastic businesses that not only know their production costs, but they really know where their areas of competitiveness are, and where they can make improvements, and where they can show continuous improvement as well. And that's going to be a really important thing to my mind as we get ready for a post-Brexit world. Yes, we don't know what's going to happen, but we know that things are likely to become more challenging, whether that's in the form of reduced farm support, or whether that's in the form of more challenging market access to the European market, a key market for us. So getting more competitive. We saw it in the two videos there just now. Both farmers talk about efficiency and driving competitiveness, and that's really important. It's something we saw coming out of the car industry, and we've seen it more recently when we've seen changes happening in the car industry and noises around essentially competitiveness being the best form of protection. And I think that's really important that we understand that, both at the farm level, but then also when we're looking at more Peter's area, we're looking at exports, because price is really, really important in winning business. It's not the only factor, of course, but it is an important factor. Consumers, whether they're here in the UK or globally, are still looking for value in what they're they're buying. And so I think I would really urge people to really sit down and start to understand more and more. AHDB are clearly here to help. We've got our knowledge exchange teams, we've got Farm Bench up and coming, is a really, really useful tool as well. But I think it's also important, coming on to the second point, is how we look at profitability in agriculture. It's been quite apparent to me over the last 10, 15 years that we've become quite annualised in terms of how we look at profitability. How much money have I made, or how much money have I lost in the last 12 months? And for my mind, that really doesn't fit with agriculture very snugly, because we know agriculture is a long-term business. We know that people are investing in it for the long term, sometimes on multiple generations. So the take that I'm looking at this, and this sort of falls out from some of the work we've been doing on volatility, is really saying, well, yes, this year's performance is important, but how has the business performed over the last 5 years? What's been the average selling price against what's been the average cost of production? That's really important, because our markets go in cycles. They go in multi-year cycles, and that's quite evident as to why they do that. So prices rise, that encourages investment in production capacity, that can sometimes lead to overproduction, and then that then leads to prices falling, and then a contraction in potential production as well, as the whole thing goes through the cycle. So farmers really got to get hold of how they're performing in that whole cycle to get a true picture of that true economic sustainability.
So just pause there if you would. Peter, so Jack referred to that sort of post-Brexit world. That's a world that I know you're immersed in. Yeah. And today, just by coincidence, you've been hosting a visit with a Chinese delegation.
No, this is a delegation of people from the sheep industry in China, the China Animal Agriculture Association, a group of 23 Chinese farmers and technicians from the sheep sector interested in importing sheep genetics from the UK, but actually that sort of visit's vital to establishing a basis for our longer term negotiations with the Chinese for access to that market for both beef and sheep meat. So we see it as extremely important in terms of developing the image of our agriculture, showing our standards and so on, which are absolutely crucial to that. But that market access piece is really crucial to the future post-Brexit. I mean, I would have to say that the optimism from the meat industry that deals with the exports more directly, if I take that sector, and some of the other sectors, the seed potato sector, for example, and those indeed involved in exporting cereals, is a little bit less optimistic, in the sense that they see some real challenges to market access, and we need to be realistic about this. The reality is that even in those sectors, for example the seed potato sector, where 75% of our exports are actually now going outside the European Union, we need to ensure that there's continuity into those markets in terms of market access. That's absolutely vital. And the reality is that the European markets still dominate our exports for many sectors, and that's a perfectly natural thing. We don't really need to look at the European Union to see very good examples of that. If you take the United States, and I think it's the best example to show this very starkly, their single largest export market is Canada. They sell twice as many goods to Canada as they do to China, twice as many, to a market of 35 million people, the population of Shanghai. So that proximity and that geopolitical effect is extremely important and mustn't be missed by our negotiators when we get to the point where we're talking about the importance of access to those European markets.
Philip, competitiveness, like it or not, that's clearly a feature.
Yeah.
We mustn't forget that, and presumably the benchmarking work is, is something that's really critical.
Yes, I was going to pick up on a point that Jack mentioned just now, that although farmers are acutely aware of the bigger marketplace they're operating in on a worldwide scale, they're also realise that they can control more at home at a farmer level, and this is where, through our monitor farm network and the benchmarking groups on those monitor farms, we're getting some real action amongst farmers, and they're realising that their next door neighbour isn't necessarily always their competitor, but they can share and exchange best practice examples. So they're really drilling into what each other are doing at a practical level, whether it's cultivation strategies or variety choices, analysis of fixed costs, how to power or labour up a farm, and share who's getting it right and the figures behind those best practices.
If you're watching us live, you can direct message us, and so I would encourage you please to hashtag AskAHDB or direct message us at the AHDB. So we have been getting questions. This is the third one of the programmes today, and I have actually got a question that's come in. I'll put this to you if I may, Peter. Christian has been in contact with us, and he says, what is going to happen to all the free trade agreements which are in place under EU? And specifically, he's talking about pork exporters and South Korea, which insist on the free trade agreements. So, can you help us with that?
Well, it's potentially a very big challenge, but it may not be. And I'm sorry to be as sort of broad as that. But the reality is those trade agreements are between the European Union and those third countries. When you look at those trade agreements in detail, and there's been a lot of legal opinion on this, theoretically the UK is actually listed separately as well as jointly with the European Union. And there is a view that the UK therefore is a participant in its own right in these trade agreements, and therefore it may be relatively straightforward to not only disentangle ourselves from the European one, but simply transfer that to a direct bilateral trade agreement. But I think it's a lot more complicated than that in reality, because if you dig into the detail of this, and unfortunately this is the bit that needs to be done, you'll see that the underlying commitment is that the negotiating party signs up to the European treaties, and we wish to leave those European treaties. So in reality, we will probably have to renegotiate those trade agreements. Now that may be relatively straightforward. It may be simply saying to South Korea or to Egypt or whoever it is, we've got a trade agreement, we're happy to stick to the terms of this trade agreement. Are you happy to stick to the terms of this trade agreement? We don't need to go through all of this again. Yes, that's fine. But unfortunately, it's never as simple as that. If I take, for example, the trade agreement between the European Union and Egypt, it's called an association agreement. Within that trade agreement, there's a specific provision for the export of seed potatoes to Egypt, which is tariff and quota free. And reciprocally, there's an agreement to take 250,000 tonnes of ware potatoes from Egypt at zero tariff. So once we leave, it's quite clear that we're not going to want to take that full quota. Therefore, there will be a negotiation. And you have to remember that there are currently 45 of these trade agreements actually in place, and another 5 in negotiation, including the the Canadian agreement, which in theory is completed, but as we know is never quite as simple as that. And each of those will probably have to be revisited in greater or lesser complexity. So that certainly has to be done, and I would suggest that's a piece of work that's absolutely essential in terms of maintaining continuity. I'll come back to this continuity thing again, because it's really important that when we leave the EU that we don't see a hiatus in trade to these third country markets. And that is avoidable provided that we get out there and get those agreements sorted out. But a lot of the trade we do isn't based on trade agreements. It's based on phytosanitary and sanitary arrangements, if you wish, between ourselves and the third country. China, for example, doesn't negotiate jointly or singly with the European Union. It negotiates bilaterally with each member state in terms of the phytosanitary rules or sanitary rules. So, for example, our specific agreements on exporting malting barley to China or pork to China are based on a UK-China discussion. And all of those agreements are underpinned by our adhesion to the European regulatory framework. So the wording of the export health certificates, and indeed our explaining how we will maintain the standards that are in place at the moment, needs to be done. Again, it can be done. That's not a problem. But it has to be done. And if we multiply that by all the countries that we're doing trade with, there's a great deal of work that needs to be put in place for that.
Now, I would imagine many of the people that are watching, listening to this programme, they'll be thinking about, so where is AHDB in all of this, and how do I get some bang for my buck? How does this impact on me? So you're clearly out, in the field, on farm, talking to farmers, listening to them, bringing it back to Stoneleigh and elsewhere, presumably. Information is then going back out onto farm and so on. Just so how is that working? Have we got enough engagement? Do we want more people to be in touch with us?
The discussions that farmers have between themselves on farm, on the monitor farms and in the benchmarking groups, they give us a steer on the topics that are of interest to them, which can then steer the work that we do in AHDB, whether that's at a sort of crop production level or whether it's at a bigger market level in terms of exploring market opportunities overseas and supply chains and so on.
Now we've made reference to these Horizon publications and the sort of work that's been going on, here at Stoneleigh. And Jack, I know that one of the topics that you've looked very carefully at, you've referred to it already, is about volatility. Yep. How do we manage volatility?
That is one of the biggest questions that this industry faces, and so in response to that we set up the Volatility Forum back in early 2016, in fact in a sort of pre-Brexit arena, and we were setting out really to find out, right, what are the things that this industry can do to better manage volatility, and I'll be open and honest and say there are no quick fixes, there are no one thing that can help this industry better manage volatility. I believe it's going to be a suite of approaches, and actually it's probably as much to do with what happens within the farm business as much as it is about what happens further up the supply chain. Now, interestingly, if you look at some of the work that we've been doing and looking at some of those approaches that we can take to better manage volatility, they actually gel very, very nicely with the approaches we can take to get better prepared for Brexit. I sound a bit like a broken record for all the meetings I go to, but it actually still comes back to competitiveness. That car industry example, the best form of protection is competitiveness. In a falling market, the most competitive business is the last business to lose money, is the first business to make money when the market rises. And if you like, that's as simple as it needs to be. I think, and it's a level of resilience as well. And the bucket list that we've put together is about a resilience health check for business as well. The harsh reality is that we find ourselves in predominantly commodity markets. It's very difficult to sort of protect ultimate margins, and we know that these markets go in cycles as well. So even for the most competitive businesses, there will still be times of extreme, of oversupply, when even those businesses have their margins squeezed as well. And that's about having a level of cash resilience that both that requires them. Philip's seeing this more and more on a daily basis than I am myself. But I think what's encouraging for me, though, is that we've been taking more and more of this work out on the road into the Cereals and Oilseeds Monitor farms, with dairy leader groups, and with more of our EU-funded, ironically, workshops working on resilience as well. It's quite interesting to see, you know, there are light bulb moments. We are witnessing light bulb moments out in the industry of farmers. Okay, I need to be looking at things on that 5-year basis. I need to understand the life of the commodity cycle, just how competitive am I making enough money on a 5-year basis to sustain myself. What that does do is that separates out for the business what needs to be done to manage long-term profit versus short-term cash flow. I have a bit of an unnerving feeling that in recent years we've become an industry that's been driven by cash flow rather than profit, and that's quite a dangerous place to be, because it can just leave you in a sort of a vicious cycle. What am I going to do to get enough cash for the business this week, this month, this year, rather than focusing, actually, this is what I need to do to generate long-term profit as well. It's very rewarding. There are businesses out there doing this and focusing on this. I think we just need to encourage more businesses to do that. AHDB is a fantastic resource for that as well. Philip's team and colleagues on knowledge exchange are a huge resource. And if I was in a farm business, I'd be wanting to understand, right, who is my person, my point of contact for my sector in my region, and how am I going to utilise that resource to get my business better prepared?
I mean, I can't emphasise enough, though, the importance that trade plays in managing volatility. I mean, as you know, in the cereal sector and many other sectors, we're actually, in effect, net importers, but we are actually balancing the market by having access to markets.
Yeah.
And if we lose that, we do take the risk of increasing the chances of volatility. So across those sectors, maintaining trade as well as everything else is a key part of managing that overall. And AHDB, as you know, plays an absolutely active role in developing those markets. We have a team out there developing markets outside the European Union. We have a network of agencies. We have a strong presence in the Chinese market and so on. So playing that key role in terms of maintaining trade is a key part of that volatility management, in my view.
So we've made some reference to materials and AHDB people and so on. If you're seeking more information on that, take a look at the AHDB website. If you go to ahdb.org.uk/Brexit, that will bring up all of the information that we've published, and also on that website there's lots of other information that may be of value to you. Peter, just to return to you, if I may, what do we do to sort of protect our trade situation? Is there anything that we can do?
All we can really do is to be active as possible. I mean, if you look at our competitors, those that do this well, they're very active in those markets, both at an official government level and at a commercial level. And really that's the key here. There's a great deal of uncertainty around at the moment, there's no doubt about that. We have strong, robust exports, and to protect those, yes, of course we need trade agreements in place, but many of this is purely to do with ensuring that there's a clear understanding of our position in terms of the regulatory framework as we leave the European Union. So that work needs to be done, but really the only way to do this is to be as active as possible, and it does need pace and it needs real commitment, both at a government level and from industry. It's not just a question of conversations with foreign governments, it's also ensuring that our businesses are export ready themselves in terms of meeting the standards of overseas markets. That's a complicated thing. Yes, we have extremely high standards in the UK, there's no doubt about that, some of the highest in the world in my view, but third country markets have different standards. They may or may believe them to be better or not, but they are different and we need to meet those standards. And that's highly complex and takes a lot of analysis, engagement and so on. So really this is a question of being actively involved, and AHDB, I'm proud to say, drives that work as far as the UK is concerned.
The title of the session is, of course, you know, what do we do next? And so if we were going to hit that question head on, Jack, what do we do next?
At an individual business level, I can't emphasise the importance of taking stock of where we are. And I think, you know, getting ready for Brexit is going to be no easy thing. I don't think. I think, but it's possible. It's very easy to absorb ourselves into the day job, there are plenty of things to be done in the farm business, and we'll just focus on that. And it's not easy. And what I would urge people to do is to really take stock of where the business is, take a routine step back from the business, and really ask some really fundamental questions. What is this business here to achieve? Is it here to achieve raw profit? Is it here to achieve deliver a lifestyle? Is it here to provide for the next generation? And really drill down and identify, right, what are the, let's say, 3 objectives of this farm business over the next 5 to 10 years? How much money does this business realistically want to, need to make over the next 5 years? How realistic is that? And if the expectations are some way distant of the reality, then there's some difficult questions that have to be asked. I think it's going to be an awful lot easier to ask these questions now. The beauty of Brexit and the build up to Brexit now is that people have got time to think. And that's going to be really, really important to be proactive now, despite all the uncertainty, but to be very proactive in terms of preparing for scenarios. We don't know what's going to happen, and so we have to look at scenarios. The key one for me, for a lot of farm businesses, is to think about, okay, how does this business look if direct payments are cut in half, cut by 75%, cut by 100%? In those scenarios, what's the impact on the business, and then what would that business have to do to survive, to continue to try and achieve its objectives? As I said, that is no easy thing, but we can't really ignore the elephants in the room.
So those are big questions, and we would say obviously that AHDB can assist with some of this thinking and planning and so on. Philip, that probably throws straight to you because you're the man on the ground.
You start on the big questions, but it quickly enables you to drill down to the little questions as well, because I think it's key and Farm Bench and benchmarking does this, drill down to every line on the profit and loss account. As Jack said, there's in the majority of cases no quick fixes, no silver bullets. So it's just looking for the marginal gains, a little bit here, a little bit there, which all contribute or can contribute to make big differences to farm bottom line.
And Peter, where would you be in the sort of what do we do next scenario?
Well, first of all, we need to protect what we've got. So we need to ensure that where we have existing strong trading relationships with non-EU countries, which are based on regulatory agreements effectively, that those are protected. Second, depending on the relationship, and I completely agree with Jack there, we don't know finally what the agreement's going to look like, but let's make the assumption, for the sake of this discussion, that we're outside the single market and we're outside the customs union. That has serious implications, even if we reach a trade agreement with no tariffs, in terms of how trade flows, in terms of origin rules and so on, customs controls at ports and so on, and the number of export health certificates that need to be produced. I mean, I've done a back of the fat packet calculation, and in the meat industry alone, the number would increase by 150%. That means that we need to have the resources to produce those certificates, and to find technological solutions such as electronic certification to deal with that. And the same thing goes with border controls. It's a number I've quoted many times, and it comes from the UK Chamber of Shipping, but 4.2 million vehicles a year roll on and roll off through Dover and the Channel Tunnel at the moment. That's a vehicle every 8 seconds. And that, if it were to increase because of controls, would cause serious logistical problems. So some of these basic things which are to do with safeguarding the current trade need to be dealt with. And they're nothing to do with tariffs and so on. They're to do with pure practicalities. And then, of course, after that, there is the question of our ongoing relationship with the European Union and our future free trade agreements with other countries. All of those have to be priorities, but I would suggest in that order.
I think, John, if I could add, I think one of the things that's going to allow UK agriculture to flourish in a post-Brexit world is the fact that we have 70 million consumers on our doorstep. And that goes hand in hand with access to global markets as well. There's a lot of comparison drawn to what the UK could or could not go through against what New Zealand went through 30 odd years ago. And I think there are lots of differences, but one of the key differences there is that we have got an awful lot of home consumption here. And that's going to be absolutely critical. There's a risk, because there's a risk that the UK becomes a beacon of free trade. And if I think of the cereal sector, for instance, grain is a very mobile commodity, and the global market could well be sizing up the UK demand as potential target markets. It comes back to competitiveness, but it comes back to the supply chain as well. And businesses in the supply chain, farmers included, can't really carry on operating in isolation, trying to make fast bucks out of each other. I can't endorse enough the need for supply chains to build trust, share data, share information, and really build those really collaborative relationships to really deliver what our consumers need. Our consumers are going to go through a tough time. Our economy is going to evolve. We're a heavily consumption-based economy. What we evolve into remains to be seen. That economy has to eat.
Yeah.
We have to be able to tap into that.
Great. Jack, thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as you can see, there's a lot of debate, a lot of negotiation to take place, but what we are absolutely clear of is that farming matters. So I've got a lot of thank yous to make. I'd like to thank you for your engagement. I'd like to thank the panel for joining us. This is the third in a series of 3 programs today, so thank you to the other people who've contributed to this program. I'd like to thank the crew, because without them we would never have got this together. So thank you, my producer Joe Crowley, but most of all, thank you for watching.